2016 was the first World Championships that I competed in, and that year we were blown away by Shintaro Eto's creativity with his Mega Ordino winning deck list. So today, with Worlds around the corner, I thought it would be quite fun to compare how my deck lists were to the eventual winner of each year. Let's get into it.
It's over! This is it! One last Magical Symphony, and that's it! Mega Ordino EX. It's over. Shintaro is your 2016 Masters Division World Champion.
Guys, everything Pokemon, and today we're looking at another new deck from Fates Collide, and in fact it's going to be looking at a new main attacker and a new Mega Evolution Pokemon, which, to be fair, I think I've undersold.
So let's start off with Shintaro's deck list then, that Mega Ordino deck. He incorporated Metal Energy alongside Magina EX with that Mystic Heart, preventing the effects of attacks done to your Pokemon that have these Metal Energy attached. I think this was mostly to protect your double colourless energy from Jirachi promo. And beyond that, it's a very streamlined 60, where you're really leaning quite heavily into that Mega Ordino. Obviously, you have quite a naturally high support count in this deck list because your Magical Symphony relies on using a supporter every turn. And the Cursed Eyes Absol is a really notable inclusion to improve the damage output of your Magical Symphony, making sure that over 2 turns you can knock out Shaymin EX. So let's compare with the deck list that I profiled on the channel on the 25th of May. This was the same month as the Fates Collide set was released. That's the set that Ordino came out in. And the main difference between my deck list and Shintaro's eventual winning deck list is that I tried to incorporate a darkness package. So my supporter lineup is actually very, very similar, and I'm playing very similar counts. But notably, obviously, I'm playing more different attackers within the list by incorporating 2 Yveltal, 2 Fright Knight Yveltal, as well as a 1/1 Zoroark in the deck list, trying to have more single prize options, but notably trying to have more dark in the deck list, because at the time we had to be much more concerned about Trevenant, as well as really good into the Vileplume variants with that Fright Knight, being able to trap some Vileplume, even with Floatstone, with Fright Knight turning off that effect. So using Trainer Hill, we can see the actual overlap between the 2 deck lists. It only says 40 cards, but it's actually a little bit more because the ends are also the same. I just played an additional copy in my list, and the Hex Maniacs were similar as well. I just played an additional copy, whereas Shintaro played an extra copy of the AZ in the deck list. And you can of course see that there's a big difference between the Dark package, where I had 6 Dark cards and 6 Dark Energy, compared to the Metal package of Cobalion as a 1 prize option, Magina, an additional Ordino EX, and that Absol for the Cursed Eyes ability, and then just the 6 copies of Metal Energy. So we're on the same counts of energy, just different flavours. I played a Switch instead of an Escape Rope, again, pretty interchangeable. There was a Pokemon Center Lady over a Skylar. I think PCL was really helpful against Greninja, actually, so I think that probably was a pretty big tech inclusion. And to help incorporate the Oblivion Wing Dark Acceleration, I played a couple Battle Compressors in the list, where Shintaro was playing 1 Super Rod as well as 1 Startling Megaphone. I think one of the final standout cards was the double Parallel City in Shintaro's deck list as well. There's so many applications for this card. You can limit your opponent's bench very often, with no downside to yourself, because you're obviously attacking with a colourless Pokemon, but also you can use this again as a means of like healing or removing some of your vulnerable Shaymin or Hooper and whatnot, whilst also reducing the damage output from some water Pokemon, again looking at Greninja, as well as some other Pokemon in there as well. Maybe make it a bit more difficult for Vespiquen to reach on you as well, because part of the selling point of Ordino was its bulk at the time. Overall, even though I am a little bit off, I think because it was literally only myself and Dark Integral Gaming that had made YouTube videos on Ordino before the World Championships, I see this one as a bit of a win.
Does he have the Guzma? There it is!
That's the game, Diego! Go, Diego, go!
Diego Casiraga is your 2017 Pokemon TCG World Champion.
Wrapping that all together, here is the full list if you guys want to pause now, take a screenshot, whatever. This is a real baseline list, so I feel like pretty much everything's a staple, other than like maybe the Glade isn't staple, maybe the 3rd level ball isn't, maybe the Skylar isn't. I think those are like the most available slots right now. I know not everyone will agree with Double Max Potion, but I'm personally like a big fan of it, and I wouldn't play less than 2, I don't think. Finally, we have the newcomer Gardevoir GX. It comes into the format as a new archetype and is already being given the burden of having best deck in format put on its shoulders. It's a heavy weight to bear, and it's an interesting one for certain, because it's a Worlds format. It's pretty much unknown. It's the first time we are playing with all these cards in a big tournament, and especially one as high stakes as this. People have to be confident with their deck, and it will only be those people who have tested extensively with Guardi that will do well with the deck, I believe. But I believe the inherent power level of Gardevoir is just very, very, very strong.
So in 2017, it was Diego Casaraga, who had already had so many top 8 placements at the World Championships, a true veteran of the TCG, coming with Gardevoir GX, the expected top performer going into the tournament, and ended up taking the dub against Golisopod Garbodor, which was somewhat of a surprise during the event as well. Obviously another brand new archetype coming out from Burning Shadows, and I think there were some great choices within the 60 here, where we have a good array of our support account alongside 3 copies of Tapu Lele GX, so we can cherry pick these for the right moments, but also just stripping back many of the item cards and having lots of Pokemon search instead. Not many players went for both Diancie and Alolan Vulpix, with oftentimes players just gravitating towards the Vulpix, and there was often a temptation to have higher item counts within the list. I also think the 3rd copy of Curlier helped incorporate the Acerola that little bit easier in Diego's list, compared to seeing some other Max Potion-based builds of Gardevoir that were also being played. So we actually overlap on 50 of the cards, which sounds like a lot, but also kind of not that much. I think the main differences you can see here was that I was playing a 1-1 Guzma and Lysander splits, whereas Diego was playing 2 copies of just Guzma. And I only had 2 copies of VS Seeker, but I was higher on a few of my other item counts. I played 2 Max Potion in the deck, and Broken Guardy eventually sort of was birthed after this set, which is actually kind of interesting to see that I was on the Max Potion train maybe before it was actually a thing. Also, I played a 4th Rare Candy because I wasn't playing Diancie or Alolan Vulpix, and also Diego played a 3rd copy of Curlier, so it was kind of slow-volving in many more matchups, whereas I had an extra Candy and 3 Level Ball, so I was sort of more proactively finding my Pokemon. I also had an extra copy of the Octillery. I played a 2-2, and Diego played a 2-1 line, which is actually quite cheeky going into the World Championships. He also played a 3rd copy of Lele compared to my 2, and I played a Super Rod versus a Rescue Stretcher, so a lot of it was kind of similar counts, but really I think the Alolan Vulpix became an absolute staple. Diancie was kind of in and out. It was definitely helpful against the Garbodor matchups where you didn't have to spend lots of item cards, so I think that was a big deal. And I think also the Wonder Energy was an additional energy within the deck list already, just to help you make sure you had enough fuel to Infinite Force through the game, but also this was a great defense that was used at the World Championships to protect around some devolving strategies from Espeon EX, as well as helping out against some confusion strategies from Espeon GX. So yeah, I think the Wonder Energy was actually a pretty good call for the World Championships, and a number of players chose to add that into the deck list. But again, not miles away, especially because the set hadn't even come out yet. Again, 10 cards away, it's actually quite a big portion when you think about how many cards have to go in the deck list. But really, there was like-for-like changes, and I think the big difference was I went heavier on the Bull Search and had Max Potion, compared to Acerola and heavier Pokemon Search, so essentially just being less weak to Garbodor, which was still something we had to bear in mind even when you had Twilight GX at your disposal.
Is the Lele there? It is. Wonder Tag.
Guzma, and that is it. Robin Schulz is the 2018 Masters Division World Champion.
It's a deck that I'm very aware of, and it's definitely a fun one to play. Kind of a very difficult deck to play as well, because you'll notice already, just looking at the strengths and weaknesses to the right here, that the deck is an ability lock deck, but it's also weak to ability lock.
So in 2018, Robin was able to take the dub with Zoroark Garbodor, definitely a powerful archetype, did well at the NAIC as well, of course. And I think the big innovations from Robin's 60 was to cut Ultra Ball altogether, which was very unorthodox. It was quite common within the deck list to just go for 4 copies of Mysterious Treasure and have that higher count of Evo Soda, as well as the Town Map. That was literally the name of the winning list from the World Championships, was Victory Map, and Town Map was an inclusion that the Schultz brothers loved playing throughout all sorts of decks. That was a feature that you would see commonly pop up with their lists. And then we compare it to OmniPoke's May 30th list. Obviously, the World Championships wasn't until August, and the only list I could find was back from May. So this was before, again, Celestial Storm was released, although I don't think there are any Celestial Storm cards within Robin 60 anyway, so I think that's completely fine and fair game. And the main thing that I had within the list was Bursting Balloon. This was such a funny thing, because I remember taking this to some cups, as well as a regional championships, and Bursting Balloon was a thing that I was really, really high on with the 60, because the idea is you can attach the Bursting Balloon to your Garbotoxin Garb, so you punish anytime your opponent wants to Guzma it up and take some damage, and the 60 actually set up into Zoroark GX really, really nicely for Righteous Beating, doing 120 into basic GX Pokemon at the time, so you'd heavily punish anyone gusting your Garb, and also you could put excess Bursting Balloons onto your Zoroark and do a very similar thing, where you could balloon up like a Garb and a Zoro against Volcanion, for example, and then you can heavily punish the Volk players, which I thought was a very, very cool option actually as well. And there could also be some situations where the Bursting Balloon damage could tick you over for Trash Launch as well. So I was mega high on Bursting Balloon synergy within the deck, because obviously when the balloon discards itself, you can then trade the remainder of the game away. So it's a very different approach where you're just trying to be a Zoroark deck like the entirety, whereas Robin's list is going to garb in some matchups and then just be a Zoroark deck with a single prizer of Trash Launch in a ton of other matchups, and then maybe do like an N plus Toxin late game situation where you know you can like secure a victory the following turn. So definitely a different like mentality around the deck altogether, and that's why there's actually quite a big disparity between the two lists as we go on to that now. You can see, as I mentioned, there is the Ultra Balls in my list here, the 3 that you can see over here, as well as those 4 copy of Bursting Balloons. So naturally, the list that Robin was able to win with played an additional Field Blower, so you can just blow the tool off your Garbotoxin the old-fashioned way, as well as an additional copy of the Float Stone that you can see down here. Also, when you're not playing the Ultra Balls, there's the extra copy of Evo Soda and Mysterious Treasure. And I think, again, one of the big things, I wasn't playing Parallel in some of my early lists of Zoro Garb. I think by the time I got to Worlds, I was definitely playing Parallel, because I remember playing them in cups and it being like a really, really big deal. And I think, yeah, probably by the NAIC, that sort of time, I was definitely playing those, because I think they were also in Stefan's winning list. So something to bear in mind there. And again, it's just really support accounts that were changed up. Rather than having like 2 Cynthia, a Mallow, and an extra Guzma in the list, Robin went for Sycamore, an extra Bridget, and an extra N. Just more counts of the good supporters, I suppose, rather than some of these kind of more situational ones, I suppose. Also, Mallow makes more sense with a Bursting Balloon build, because you have trade online for longer portions of the game. And again, some high counts here. The 3 Psychic Energy switched out for the units as well as the Kartana GX, giving the deck a much more usable GX attacking option with that Blade GX, which is powerful. And Robin then had the Puzzle of Time option with E-Hammer and Kartana for more special energy disruption, which was something kind of lacking within my 60. Essentially, without the Hammer disruption and without the Parallel disruption, I was much more looking to Garbotoxin lock throughout longer portions of the game, whereas Robin was looking to have these other elements of disruption throughout the game and be much more selective of when to turn on that Garbotoxin. So again, you can see why there's those big differences. Mewtwo was in my list as well to help out against Buzzwole, of course, for even more type coverage. But of course, Trash Launch was chipping in for that regardless, so not necessarily a mandatory inclusion, just a faster response, really, to a early Buzzwole. But yeah, ironically, I loved Zoro Garb. I played this a lot in that format before it did well at NAIC and before it did well at the World Championships. So I played a very different build that was like probably just wrong looking back at it now with the great results from the other lists. But I was very high on this hype train very early on, actually, as this combination of cards, basically just mashing the 2 best cards in format and playing them in the same deck. And that's actually something that we've seen time and time again from other top deck builders in more recent years. So something to bear in mind.
He's just going to retreat and use Macargo GX.
He's going to remove all the energy, and that is going to do it. Your 2019 Pokemon Trading Card Game Masters Division World Champion from Australia, it's Henry Brand.
It's not been talked about a huge amount, and it's one that is still in and around the top, I think. It's got a surprisingly reasonable Pika ROM. It's got a 50-50 Zard, I would say, because you are also a Charizard deck, by the way, when you want to be. And yes, Reset Stamp is annoying for this deck, and yes, Power Plant's annoying, but when you play 2 Reshizard, you're basically like playing a mirror at that point. So it's not like too big of a deal, and you're playing Great Potions as well, so if they're going to try and do like little pokey stuff, you have Great Potion for that. And of course we have Latios GX, which causes them a huge headache all the time. So
then we come to Henry Brand's incredible Perfection Mewtwo deck, and I think this was one of those situations where Henry simply had a far superior list to most other pilots of the Mewtwo and Mew archetype. You'll see my list in a moment and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Essentially the choice to trim down basically every supporter that wasn't 4 Welder and 2 Bills Analysis, which was essentially trying to be boss's orders by trying to cherry pick custom catcher in the late game. You were literally just saying these are the best supporters and let me do that as much as possible. That's why you see the Radar as well as 3 copies of Dedenne and a very heavy item package with 4 Acrobike and 4 Pokegear. We hadn't really seen lists this aggressive in the Pokemon TCG until this point. It did seem like a handful of top deck builders were able to cotton on to this concept of just going very heavy item package and just lean into the best supporters in the game, and that was what really set this deck list aside. I think there are also a couple big standout inclusions. The Espeon Deoxys, not everyone was playing this option, but having that cross-divide GX attack when you ramp the Welder so aggressively could actually really punish some setup-based decks. It randomly helped out against Pidgeotto control, which was a top deck from the DDG players, as well as helping out into the Malamar matchup, which was significantly one of Mewtwo's worst matchups going into the tournament, and one of the reasons why people put Mewtwo and Mew so far down on the list, actually, as top contenders. Our community rating actually put Mewtwo at the 10th best deck for the World Championships. We were bold in saying it was the 6th best deck, to be honest with you, and many other pilots were able to then go on and make it the insane monster that it was. Henry also played the Cobalion GX, which is one of those standout cards that often gets cut from his deck list as soon as you get the World Championship list and change it for basically any other card. But beyond that, it was such a really good grounding of what a real 60 should look like, and Mewtwo and Mew flourished from then on from this new baseline. Now, for some reason, the trainer hill isn't really working with the imports right now, but that doesn't matter too much because this list is wildly off. This was a video where I was doing a list dump before I literally left for the World Championships myself. This was on August 11th, so pretty close to the World Championships, actually. I think maybe just like a week or two before. And you can see this list is wildly wrong, I think. In terms of attacking Pokemon, rather than Magcargo, I had the Dragonite GX as that high damage output option. I was also playing 2 copies of Reshizard so that I could be more of a Charizard deck when I came up against the Mali matchup, just hoping that I wouldn't be hit for weakness, essentially, was one of the concepts there, because pre-Worlds there was rumors of Mali's even playing the Power Plant Stadium to shut down Jirachi GX, so that was becoming terrifying. I think one of the main things you can see here, though, is I just did not play enough turbo item cards. Instead of playing the Acrobikes and the Pokegears, I was playing 2 Hapu and 4 Coach Trainer, and these just aren't good enough supporters to play. They're so low tempo compared to just hitting your main supporter out. So I think that was the big sort of innovation that Henry and his testing group came up with, is that these are just the best supporters you can be playing. Let's do that every single turn and not settle for these subpar supporters that have been making their way into all of the Japanese 60s pre-Worlds, as well as a lot of the obviously Western builds. You can see myself here playing those. Interestingly, I played a Tapu Fini in my deck as a Tech 2 Blacephalon. Henry beat Blacephalon in the finals without the tech inclusion, and I was putting the Fini in because I was scared of Blounds. So that was a cool thing to see. I went Rainbow Energy based and had the Greninja GX in there as well. That was also a pretty common inclusion, actually. But Henry just said that he didn't want a wall breaking option in the Mist Slash and just went for a Viridian Forest and some Psych Energy to go alongside his other attackers. Notably, I didn't have the Espeon Deoxys in the deck list, which is partially why I think my matchup into Mali was so poor, and I think a lot of players' matchup into Mali was so poor, testing that Mewtwo early on. And also, again, I'm playing spaces for Great Potion and Reset Stamp. Stamp's obviously a fantastic card, but 1 is really copium, how am I meant to hit that at the right time, even with Bill's analysis and whatnot in the list. Whereas Great Potion was, I think it was a tech for Reshizard at the time, because oftentimes they would try and do outrage pokes into you. I think that's what Greenzard used to try and do into Mewtwo, if I recall correctly. But also it could help against, again, things like Malamar, where they would try and use Spell Tag Math to put you in range of stuff. So sometimes you could heal off the 10 damage even that you would put on yourself from Rainbow. So you would stay out of range of a Giratina as well, even if they were hitting you for weakness. So even if they had Power Plant, you were 1 step ahead. But yeah, 2 niche overall. Just go faster with Welder was a big learning curve and a big deck building change and shift in mentality. How many times now do we see deck lists in the format play 4 of your best supporter? We've just seen Lost Box win the NAIC with 4 Colrus and then just a Roxanne. So yeah, I think that whole shift in mentality started at this World Championships.
I retreats to the pump, Kaboo, but I don't.
Let's see it, Andre. Are we going to see a boss's orders in his hand? There it is!
And Andre will be your 2022 Pokemon Trading Card Game World Champion for the 2nd time in 3 tournaments. Europe's gone and done it, Joe. Congratulations to Andre.
So let's have a quick look at a sample 60. I'm calling it the theme deck Arceus because it starts to look like it when you have 3 different colors of energy and 3 different sort of backup attackers here. Funnily enough, even though it looks kind of memey, because we get to yoink those spaces from the Phoebe pad, you actually don't lose out on much consistency. We're playing the same supporters. So for 2022, after a long break from Pokemon, thanks to the pandemic, we come back to London for 2022, and Andre is able to take it down with Arceus Pikachu Decidueye. Incredibly, it matched a mirror in the final with Daichi Shimada, with a list that also incorporated Galarian Moltres as well as Jolteon. So insane to see two counter-style archetypes make it all the way to the final. Of course, Arc Pika did win the NAIC with Azul GG, so this was a high-profile archetype on the radar, but the Decidueye was a great new inclusion to incorporate because it gave you an out against Miltank, which was much more stable than Phoebe Palpad, because you were able to churn through them much more easily, as well as the Decidueye giving you upside as a mirror attacker by hitting full fighting weakness. In the build-up to the World Championships, I did spotlights for all of these decks, and obviously with Arc Pika doing very well at the NAIC, I did a whole chat about different ways to play the Arc Pika Crobat. There was a vanilla 60, there was a list that played Zigbelt to be more aggressive with your Arceus V-Star, but then I also had this big section about incorporating fighting types into your deck list, where I said that the Decidueye is actually a huge inclusion, and then I dubbed Arc Theme Deck as a potential option for the World Championships. So I actually was quite early onto this concept as well, which is something that I also pat myself on the back for this year at the very least, which is a nice pleasant change from the previous World Championships. This was on July 29th, where I posted this video spotlighting Arc Flying Peak, and you can see that I've incorporated all of the VMAXs actually. I had Crobat with VMAX in the list to be a third type coverage to help out a little bit more against that Mewtwo V Union that we saw, of course, Azul pilot to the NAIC first place finish. Looking at the differences between the deck lists, it's actually not that many. I think the big thing here is that I tried to add a training court to make the Decidueye more of like a useful attacker throughout the entire game, whereas Andre just went, no, Path of the Peak's the best stadium card, let's play 4 copies of those, which I think overall is a really good choice when you're not playing the Dark package that I had in the list, which was 3 Dark Energy and Crobat, versus Andre going for just an extra Lightning Energy and a Capture Energy to add to a little bit of consistency. Because I had those 3 attacking lines in the list, I had that Hisuian and had a thinner line of the Decidueye, because I was shoehorning in that Crobat, whereas Andre was able to play that thicker line of Decidueye, have the 3rd Flying Peak, which is just another good lead in the deck list. And then we just have a few other like minor changes. There was 1 additional boss in the list for Andre, whereas I had an Escape Rope, which was just a second switch out in the list. I played an extra Evo Incense and a Roxanne, compared to, by the looks of things, like Luminion was a consistency include, as well as like that Capture Energy as well. So very small tweaks. Overall, the concept was there. So again, quite happy with this one and how it played out for the World Championships. I genuinely, and I'm not just saying this, I genuinely was telling my friends to be playing an archetype like this. I thought it was a really good choice for the World Championships. And Andre is a teammate of mine, so he was in the group chats when he was seeing me spout on my soapbox how good I thought this was a play for Worlds, and Andre hit a ton of Palkia in day 2 of that World Championships and had a phenomenal run.
Vance is playing quickly. Does he have the pieces? Switch card, moving the Mew VMAX into the active spot, and Boss's orders brings up the Zacian V. Vance Kelley, the 2023 Pokemon TCG World Champion!
But just having that push potential to really maximize your outs against V-Star matchups. You know, Arc is still really popular, and I'm expecting it to be popular for Worlds, and we are seeing an uptick in Giratina Lost Box specifically, so having more V-based damage output with the extra belt and having the Horn to pick off a evolving V Pokemon in the sort of mid to late game can be massive. And in Yokohama, it was Vance Kelley taking the win with Fusion Strike Mew. He'd been a veteran of Mew for the entire season, so clearly had a ton of reps with the archetype, and there were also some big standout cards in his 60 that set them apart. I think the Box of Disaster was that big tool takeaway that Vance coined and made it a really interesting inclusion to help out against some of the V-Star matchups, but also punish the Gardevoir matchup, which seemed to be a really good call for the tournament. Once again for this Worlds, rather than doing a top 10 decks, I just did a spotlight video for Mew. Of course, Mew had been a contender for a long time. I posted a video on the 2nd of August before I travelled out to Japan, so a couple weeks before the tournament, and the list I came up with was actually just 4 cards different from Vance's. Of course, Mew was played so much by so many people and had such widespread success. It's not surprising that we were actually quite close on deck lists. The main difference is that I had Ice-Q in the list to try and respect Spiritomb that little bit more, whereas Vance was just sort of taking the risk that people weren't going to play it and had Oricorio to help out in mirror matches instead. I had a Rope in my list, whereas Vance had an additional switch cart, so again, just horses for courses. And I think the small nuance that he had, which was better than my 2 choices, was Echoing Horn was my help to the V-Star matchups, whereas he had the Box of Disaster. And Cleansing Gloves was my improvement to the Guardy matchup, as well as the Lost Box matchup, whereas Box was also helping that Guardy at the same time, and Vance was able to play an extra bounce in his deck list to Path to the Peak. So the Cave plus Box was better than playing Horn plus Cleansing Gloves. So again, just great choices all round from our world champions. Hopefully you guys found it fun and interesting to look back at some of the old OmniPoke content as well as some of our old previous world champions. I think it's a cool thing just to look at the mentality of players before tournaments, as well as how the top players actually can adapt their deck list and get that one step ahead of the meta game. So I did think this was a useful exercise with Worlds in mind, and making sure that you're making the most out of your deck list, as well as, of course, these players who have made it to the World Championships are just incredible in-game players as well, which can also be a huge difference. Let me know what you thought of this quite different video and a fun look back. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.